My name is Jessica Buscho, and some of you I've had the pleasure of meeting, but my name may also be familiar to others because my story involves extraordinary measures. But to know me, you have to know who I was before I was a cancer patient. I am a wife, mother of 3, daughter, sister, friend, lifelong learner, volunteer, outdoor enthusiast, and loyal fan to my alma mater, UC Davis. Of all these, my greatest joy comes from being a mom. My kids are my whole life. My daughter, Gianna, is 14 years old and will be starting high school soon. My son, Connor, is 12 and has special needs, and my baby, Brennan, is 10 now, but he's still my shadow. For 4 years since my diagnosis, I have done everything to be here for moments and milestones with them. They are my motivation and my why I am still here, but the how is explained more through my other roles. Sometimes I feel like my entire life has been preparing me for something this challenging and monumental. As a stage 4 colorectal cancer, my diagnosis came in 2017. I have been using since who I was before I had cancer to persevere and endure the hardships that come my way. 4 years of active treatment requires so much of the body, mind, and spirit. Fortunately, I've been able to use the lessons and skills I developed during my early life to live this long. And since you are all familiar with colorectal cancer, you know how few of us make it to this mark. My husband, Justin, calls me scrappy because even when my back is up against the wall, I find a way to look on the bright side and put my abilities to use to overcome. I am the oldest of 3 kids and grew up in Northern California. Where my family lacked in resources, we made it up with elbow grease. I grew up on a farm. My dad, a mechanic and tractor operator, and my mom, a work-from-home bookkeeper and adult care home manager, raised us to be compassionate, diligent, inquisitive, faithful, and resilient. Life on the farm was fun, but never easy. There was always work to be done. So I learned at a very early age satisfaction that comes from hard work, and growing up this way instilled great strength in my siblings and I. My sister was born with neurological defects, and because of her, I became a natural born advocate. It wasn't until my own son was diagnosed with autism that I realized how my relationship with my sister has taught me to speak up for yourself and for those who can't speak for themselves. This skill has become useful again as I navigate the challenges of my own cancer care. Being on the farm also taught me to appreciate the outdoors. As I got older, I developed a love for running, hiking, and backpacking, all of which taught me endurance, something that has been vital through years of treatments, procedures, appointments, and testing. But perhaps the most useful value I gained in my early life was to ask questions and never stop learning. My thirst for knowledge has helped me search for and process information to seek an understanding about my own disease. My background and love for science has also served me well as a patient, leading me to read research papers, sometimes late into the night, and attend conferences to stay on top of current advancements. I have learned that long-term survivorship requires dedication, connection to the community, a great medical team, creativity, tenacity, which I have plenty of resources, and a bit of luck. My path has not always been clear, and it has taken me in circles at times, but I am alive today because I was aware of advancements in testing, understanding, and treatment of the disease based on biomarkers. I'm actually one of the rare cases of a patient who heard about disease-specific treatment from early in my treatment course. I actually learned about MSI testing at my very first oncology appointment. And I remember so many details of that first meeting, even though it was back in 2017. My husband and cousin accompanied me to the Community Oncology Center. We rode in stiff silence up the elevator to the 3rd floor, and I checked in with the oddly cheerful receptionist. It was cold and silent in the waiting area, and I could not wait to get out of there. Everyone looked so sick. Clearly, I hadn't yet accepted that I was sick too. I was naive and had no experience with cancer other than knowing some distant relatives had it. We were directed to a small medical exam room whose only decor was some flyers about breast cancer. My cousin made small talk with me to occupy my mind, And Justin clenched a flagged stack of papers about colorectal cancer diagnosis that he had found on the internet. The doctor flew in and introduced herself. She was young and spoke quickly. Within a few minutes, she had shared how grim the outlook was for stage 4 patients. But I'm young, so that doesn't matter to me, right? No, she replied, emotionless, and continued on. I felt the air thicken, like I was swimming in jello. Her words became a hum of white noise while my thoughts ran wild. I had to be here for my kids. They were only 6, 8, and 10. My husband and I had just celebrated our 11th anniversary and had plans. I had just started working again, and I was leading a Girl Scout troop. Every once in a while, I heard a word that sounded unfamiliar and stood out. Neoadjuvant, mismatch repair, microsatellite, pembrolizumab. Suddenly, I noticed she was waiting for me to answer. What? We can send a biopsy for testing to see if you qualify for this trial at Stanford. Do you want to do that? Only 5% of patients get in, but they're only accepting patients who haven't done chemotherapy. This is your only shot. Will it delay the start of chemo? Again, it doesn't matter. Chemo won't cure you. You'll do it until it doesn't work anymore for the rest of your life, probably 2 years. I looked at Justin and saw he was just as broken as I. Sure, send it for testing. She answered a few questions about port placement and biopsy scheduling, and then left as quickly as I came in, or as she came in. I only made it 10 feet past reception when I started sobbing uncontrollably. My cousin grabbed me and pulled me in. There we stood, hugging, as my wails echoed through the hallway, and that was it. I was dying. Ironically, we had family photos scheduled for that night, so we dried our eyes and rode home in silence. Oh, I switched my page, sorry. It went to full screen, sorry. That day, and those feelings are something that is not just etched in my mind, but we have these beautiful family photos to remind us of how it all started. The next week, I learned I didn't qualify for the Stanford study because I was MSS, not MSI. I didn't know what any of this meant, except that it wasn't what they were looking for, so I started chemo. The test didn't make a difference for me. However, it did make me aware that researchers were working to find new treatments for cancer, depending on some small component of each person's disease. I would never forget this. Months later, we went for a second opinion with a GI oncologist within my insurance network. He spent most of our appointment talking about something we called tumor genetics. Just like before, words became foreign, only this time they weren't words, they were odd series of letters and numbers, with no explanation other than, you don't want this one, or this one's pretty bad, but common. Luckily, by now, we had learned to always bring a notebook to appointments. So Justin scribbled away, trying to keep up with the doctor. We were far from home, so we knew our follow-up would just be an email or a phone call. So we needed to remember everything from that appointment. Sure enough, a few weeks later, when results came in, I received an email from the GI oncologist with no explanation, just a list of my biomarkers, but one stood out in memory. I panicked and called Justin at work. When he answered, I hastily asked, is KRAS the bad one? I feel like it was the bad one. Justin went to his car to get a notebook and said, KRAS is not the bad one or the worst one, but it is bad. I felt relief, but we were still lost. We decided it was time to pay out of pocket to seek another opinion at an NCI center. We had been avoiding it because our insurance wouldn't cover the costs, but I knew through stories in Blue Hope Nation that this was our path to cutting edge treatment. We made an appointment at UCSF and they recommended more comprehensive tumor testing. So I went home and asked my oncologist. He denied the need for it. I was responding well to treatment and tolerating it well. So I should just stick with that. He reminded me of the stage 4 mantra, chemo for life. Not satisfied with his response, I went back to Blue Hope Nation to ask if I should push for it. And CCA's Jeannie Moore wrote me this explanation. The more information we have about genetic makeup, the better. There may be a pathway that responds to another drug that is already approved for use in another cancer like breast or lung. And you may benefit from using it off label. The comment ignited my curiosity. I changed my insurance, moved my care to UCSF, and started learning about my disease. Over the next 2 years, rapid progress was made in the way we test and treat colorectal cancer. My interest grew, and I started connecting with other like-minded patients who were following the research. My medical literacy grew too. As January 2019 approached, I reached out to the Alliance to volunteer for ASCO GI. And while I was volunteering, I first heard the words liquid biopsy from a company representative that stopped by the booth. I went back to UCSF and asked for this test. After a short battle with my insurance, we got it. I learned I don't just have a KRAS mutation, but a KRAS G12C mutation. And most exciting of all was that this mutation was being studied and was possibly treatable. There was buzz in my small cancer community about a trial that would target our mutation. In April 2019, after developing an allergy to oxaliplatin during my 25th treatment, I was hopeful that I could save second-line chemo by enrolling in one of these new G12C trials. One day in May, I got on a plane to visit 2 different cancer centers in Southern California to meet with the trial teams. Excuse me. It was a long day, and when I walked in the door 20 hours later, I felt exhausted, excited, and defeated. The trials were exciting, but they were both full and had very long wait lists. I learned that there are more patients with these mutations in other cancers, so they were enrolling those patients too. It didn't look promising to get enrolled as a colorectal cancer patient in the timing that I needed, and even if a spot opened up, the travel schedule was going to be intense. I planned to keep in touch with both trials, but I knew I would need to find something else in the meantime. Living hundreds of miles from the trial proved to be a bigger obstacle than I anticipated. I called and emailed regularly to let them know I was still interested, but at the same time, I was busy being a mom. I was driving carpool, going to Girl Scouts, baseball, and cross country. I felt torn between wanting to be present and make memories now and to do what I had to do to be here with my family for longer. Even if I got a spot on one of those trials, how would I handle the time away? I visited a local trial team and asked why they didn't have this kind of trial near us. I pleaded with them to open a G12C trial, but they were busy running other trials. So I reluctantly started second-line chemo. Sorry. Within a few months, my second-line therapy failed unexpectedly, and there was no more time to be choosy. I would need to make a major commitment to travel for treatment to a G12C trial or join a different trial closer to home. I met again with the local team and accepted a spot on a first-in-human KRAS vaccine trial. Being the first woman on the trial was exciting, but also terrifying. I was glad to be close to home. By my third cycle on trial, COVID had been detected in California, and my life significantly slowed down. No activities to drive kids to, work canceled, everything crossed off my calendar except cancer care. With all that extra time, I buried myself in research and advocacy. I spent more time in online cancer communities. While my kids attended virtual school, I read and went online for conferences and learning days. As a result, I became more aware of the progress being made. More G12C trials were opening now, and combination trials were on the horizon. At the same time, COVID was shining light on disparities in equity and access worldwide. I became aware that my struggle to understand and seek treatment for my disease was not unique. Patients globally had to rely on their own research and seek out information from reliable sources in order to get cutting-edge treatment. I was no different. In May 2020, we discovered unexpectedly that my cancer had metastasized to my brain, and I was hospitalized for 11 days for a craniotomy. Several days into my stay, I learned that the brain mets made me ineligible to continue on my current trial. Suddenly, I was desperate for systemic treatment again. With the world on lockdown and no visitors in the hospital, I was alone in the neuro ICU with nothing to keep me busy. I decided to use this time to reach out to every oncologist I had met over the previous 3 years for ideas, and it was a lot. I included the investigators on the G12C trials. By some miracle, one of the trials was expanding enrollment and they had an opening in 4 weeks, but I would need to rush to get surgery and gamma knife done in order to start washout on their timeline. I put my advocacy skills to work and started calling schedulers to make sure I met that deadline, and it worked. In July 2020, I started my first G12C trial, and within weeks, we were seeing response. The trial was shrinking my tumors. I had always been open with my cancer experience, and as I shared my good news, other patients started asking questions. I realized that not every patient knew what biomarkers are, and even fewer were familiar with their own. There were obvious differences between those who knew and those who didn't. The ones who were most familiar with their disease were seen at NCI centers, had good insurance, weren't afraid to ask questions, had more resources, and were mostly white. This was true for me too. I have plenty of resources and very few barriers, but still, we were struggling. I was only a few weeks into my trial, and the demands of traveling 750 miles round trip every 3 weeks during a pandemic was weighing on my family. Travel was using all of our savings and giving us a never-ending sense of anxiety about COVID exposure. A close friend suggested an RV, but there was no way we could afford that. She insisted we try doing a GoFundMe campaign. It ended up being a huge success, and thanks to a few news organizations sharing our story, we managed to raise $52,000, and an RV dealer heard our story and sold us this beautiful RV at cost. We had a solution. But my joy was overshadowed by awareness of how much privilege I had and how this gave me access to treatment that so many others don't have. This became even more apparent as a local G12C CRC friend passed away after not being able to enroll in a trial until it was too late. Just weeks after his passing, I learned of another person that died while waiting for their biomarker results. And then another friend wanted to get biomarker testing but didn't have transportation to a cancer center. So many of us who have had better outcomes have committed ourselves to helping others as a way to cope with survivor's guilt. We know that the information we learned in patient communities help us, and we can want to pass it along in hopes of helping others. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't save every patient. This can lead to disappointment and heartbreak. Sometimes we say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, as a way of consoling ourselves when a patient fails to use shared resources. I've tried to tell myself this, but knowing how many resources I have and how hard it was, I can't accept this explanation. We need a more hands-on approach to really increase equity in information access and cancer care. Instead of the horse water drinking analogy, I think of my kids' experience raising baby chickens. They learn that chickens won't try a water source unless you physically bring them to the water and dip their beak in. I have found that the same is true with patients. You cannot simply tell them where to find resources. You have to give them resources in terms they understand. When we do this, they are much more likely to take ownership and learn about their disease. And the feeling that comes from helping someone learn about their disease, especially when it leads to opening new doors and new treatments, is so rewarding. As for me and my disease, right now, there's a lot of uncertainty around which direction to go for treatment when I eventually develop resistance to my trial drugs, as this is a relatively new area of study. So right now, every moment that I'm not making memories with my kids, I'm busy reading research on the MAP kinase pathway, attending KRAS-specific talks and conferences, seeking out opinions from experts on my biomarkers. I am one of the first colorectal cancer patients who will see how sequencing and combining novel and targeted treatments with existing treatments may lead to long-term survivorship. To be a patient pioneer as these discoveries are made is empowering and inspiring. I truly believe that someday this kind of biomarker testing and biomarker-led personalized treatment will lead to longer lives and better outcomes for all of us. Staying connected to the research keeps me optimistic and reminds me that the hopeless plan for stage 4 patients of chemo for life will soon be a thing of the past. Thank you.